Welcome to the EUROSTUDENT Talks. I'm greeting you from Tallinn, Estonia. We have a bit snowy day here today, but actually we are not talking about Estonia. We are focusing on Switzerland today, and especially students' financial situation and mental health during the COVID-19 pandemic. As usually, the event will be recorded. And also, I have one little request to everyone. In the chat, you can see a link to EUROSTUDENT Talks feedback form. So if you could take a minute after the webinar, I would be very, very happy to receive your feedback, your opinion, your ideas, how we could develop our webinar series to be even better. But to continue with our today's webinar, I'm very happy to have here Yasin from Switzerland. Yasin Bouhaba is has been working at Federal Statistical Office of Switzerland for 6 years. He is involved in the Swiss survey on social and economic conditions of student life, as well as EUROSTUDENTS since 2016. And besides research activity as a participant country, Federal Statistical Office is also a member of the EUROSTUDENT 8 Consortium, being in charge of quality assurance. And I won't make it any longer from my side. Hello, Yasin. Thanks that you could join us. And I will give the word to you, and you can start with your presentation.
Thanks, Marlene. So hi, everyone. First of all, I will share my screen, then you can see my presentation. Since we had some technical issues, I would like to be sure that everyone can see my screen and my presentation.
Yes, we can. At least I can.
That's good. Thanks. So today we are releasing our report on financial situation and mental health of students during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this presentation is a summary of the main results of this publication. German-speaking and French-speaking people can download the report on our website, and I will also indicate the website at the end of the presentation if some of you are interested in downloading this report. So this publication is a teamwork. We produced it together with Philippe Fischer and Véronique Meffre, and I'm doing the presentation today. So thanks, Marlene, to give us the opportunity to show our result to the EUROSTUDENT partners and community. I will now start and present the content of today's presentation. Firstly, I'll talk about the context of this analysis and how we decided to do it. Then we'll look at how we collected data for the analysis. I will present the data source and describe the population studied. Thirdly, I will show the main results on financial difficulties and mental health problem of students during the pandemic. And finally, we'll have time for the discussion. Please don't hesitate to ask questions in the chat when something isn't clear or if you need further explanations. But if you have discussion points, I will ask you to keep your comments and questions for the end of the presentation. So as we all know, the COVID pandemic has impacted and transformed higher education in an unprecedented scale. And researchers, as well as higher education policymakers, were looking at new development in 2020 and 2021. And they still are. The effects of the pandemic on student life in general is of interest. And even though some of us would like to forget and to elude COVID-19 and its consequences. So just as a reminder, we had the EUROSTUDENT 7 final conference tagged with the COVID topic. Different presentations as well as keynote speakers gave talks on the effects of the pandemic. And in the current round, many of us knows that stakeholders agreed on having a topical module in the questionnaire, a topical module that will cover the effects of COVID-19 on studies. In Switzerland as well, policymakers and researchers were analyzing different aspects of this new context. We have several higher education institutions that conducted their own survey on digitalization of teaching and learning, for instance. Here at the statistical office, our colleagues specialized in transition and trajectories within education made, for instance, analysis on time lag between high school and entry into higher education. Another example, transition into labor market of graduates during the pandemic context was also a topic of the colleagues in charge of the graduate survey at FSO. However, when it comes to student living and study condition, financial situation, and mental health were the major issues, in Switzerland at least. We had many parliamentary interventions on this topic in year 2021. And the media coverage was also quite intense. During specific time period, one could read almost every day an article on students' difficulties in the context of the pandemic. So together with Philippe and Veronique, we see here an information need from our stakeholders. Before moving on to the next point, I'd like to present how the situation looked like in the general population in Switzerland in year 2020 as context information. This graph, it's split in two, but it's only one graph. This graph shows data on the financial situation of inhabitants. It's data from the statistics on income and living conditions, SILC, which is an European survey. So the graph shows the proportion of people living in a household for which it's easy or very easy to make ends meet. And what we can see is that the pandemic seems not to have worsened the financial situation of people living in Switzerland, rather the opposite. The proportion of inhabitants with a good evaluation of their financial situation has increased from year 2019, so this color here, to year 2021, the light blue. We see here an increase. Regarding mental health, we have another graph here. Sorry, it's in German, but I will explain it. So it's a graph that shows an indicator based on the mental health inventory 5 survey instrument. So as a reference, one sees on the left, just here, proportion of population with a middle to high emotional distress in year 2017. The proportions range from 11 to 17%, depending on the age group. Here are the different age groups tagged with different colors. And then here, you can see the indicator, how it has developed throughout the year 2020 and 2021. In this time period marked with gray color, you can see when it was forbidden to carry on in-person activities in the higher education institutions in Switzerland. So it was the first here, here the first lockdown, and here the second waves, and here where you need a COVID certificate to carry on in-person activities. So we can see here on this graph that the emotional distress of the 18 to 29-year-old people has dramatically increased with the start of the second waves of infections here. It remains quite high then, with almost 40% of the 18 to 29 year old people with middle to high emotional distress. So to sum up this situation for the general population, in year 2020, so the financial situation of people living in Switzerland hasn't worsened, rather the opposite. And in the same year, the mental health of the population was significantly worse compared to year 2017. And this is particularly true for the 18 to 29-year-old persons. So I will now move on to the sources of study.
Yassine, we can't see your screen at the moment. I think you stopped sharing.
Maybe I clicked on the wrong buttons. I will share it again.
Because when you said that you will move on, then then it disappeared, but
Okay, I'm sorry for this.
no worries.
How about now?
Yes, it's fine. And luckily you didn't disappear. It was just a shared screen.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, technical issues today are quite intense. So what I wanted to know before moving to the methodological aspects of our specific studies, it's just to say something general on how to survey this specific context of COVID-19 pandemic. So there are different options to capture student living condition in a new context. First, one can prepare and conduct a specific survey in a short period of time to measure the current state of things. These ad hoc surveys, or one can carry on the planned survey and compare a core indicator before and after the pandemic, or ask retrospectively students on the impact of the pandemic on their living and study conditions. The two last analytical strategies were carried out in EUROSTUDENT 8 survey. On the one hand, countries who conducted their survey in year 2022, can now compare the situation with 2019. And for instance, they can make a comparison about housing or employment rate. And on the other hand, the second strategy, analytical strategy, there's a topical module in which students were asked to assess retrospectively the effects of COVID-19 on their study conditions. By the way, Joris and Ardita from the Netherlands presented during a previous EUROSTUDENT talk preliminary result on this topic. And we could notice with this presentation that all aspects of student life were impacted by the pandemic, often in a negative way. And social contacts as well as teaching quality were the most impacted aspects. It's interesting that the Observatoire de la vie étudiante in France carried on these three strategies. Sorry, they conducted their usual survey in spring 2020. Then they prepared and executed a flash study during the lockdown in summer 2020, and finally conducted another survey in summer 2021 to measure study condition after the lockdown. In Switzerland, we decided to investigate student financial situation and mental health via the Swiss Survey of Higher Education Graduates of year 2020. So we've included a module of 4 questions in the part of the graduate survey questionnaire that deals with study condition before graduating. Why did we do so? So there are significant advantages of doing so. We benefit from the whole survey infrastructure, and it was almost cost-free to do so. We didn't need to survey people another time, which isn't trivial in the context of an increasing overall survey workload. However, there's an important shortcoming, and that is to say a selection bias. With other words, we only ask students who completed their studies. Students who did not succeed or first-year students were not included in the survey then. And this has the following consequences. Financial difficulties as well as mental health problems could be partially underestimated. And this is very important to mention. On the one hand, students who extended the duration of their study or even dropped out are not represented, but they could have done so because of their financial or health issues. On the other hand, first-year students might have encountered greater mental health problems because they entered higher education in the context of the lockdown. So one should keep this in mind when looking at the results. We'll now look at the topical questions in order to have a better idea of how we captured financial difficulties and mental health problems. So here is the question on financial difficulties. We wanted to have different indicators to be sure that the results are solid. You can see that we ask for insufficient income, unpaid bills, negative account balance, and restrictions on basic necessities. As we wanted to investigate the effects of the pandemic, we defined the following answer options. So no, yes, but same as normal, yes, somewhat more than normal, and yes, much more than normal. For the analysis, we merged the last two categories in a joint one. These items, as well as the response options, were inspired by the French questionnaire from the Observatoire de la vie étudiante. Regarding mental health, we used an adapted version of the Patient Health Questionnaire 4. This is a survey instrument used as a screening to detect anxiety and depression disorders among the population, and it's often used by doctors and health professionals. But it's also used as a data collection instrument. The first two items measure anxiety, and the two last items depression symptoms. Our adapted version differs from the original one in the wording of the question as well as in the answer options. So for the answer options, we use the same idea, say assessing the situation compared to normal, the current and actual situation compared to normal. Let's now have a look at some key facts regarding the Swiss survey of higher education graduates. So this survey investigates labor market integration of graduates 1 year and 5 years after a graduation. The survey includes higher education bachelor, master, and doctorate graduates. For our analysis, the population studies was reduced down to bachelor and master students who received their diploma between June 2020 and December 2020. We defined this subpopulation to exclude students who graduated at the beginning of the lockdown and doctoral students who tend to have study conditions less dependent or on in-person learning. Regarding the survey method and the response rate, it's a census, a full survey, and interviews are completed via an online questionnaire. The 2021 first survey took place between September 2021 and December 2021. Almost 58,000 graduates were contacted. 58% of them completed the questionnaire, which is a very high net response rate. So in the end, we had almost 25,000 responses at our disposal to conduct our analysis. And this has to be compared to a Swiss higher education student population of about 210,000 persons. Okay, shall we now move on to the results? We'll start with the financial difficulties. You can see on this graph the distribution of our 4 items related to financial difficulties. Just a quick break, Marlene, if there are some questions in the chat, please interrupt me because I can't see the chat now.
Yeah, there is
so you can,
but I think we can talk about this also during the discussion part, because it's not
okay, fine.
exactly about graph or something you covered, but it could be also related later, I think.
Okay, great, thanks. So 4 items we talked about earlier. We are mainly interested in this dark green subbars, which is the effect which these bars measure the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on financial difficulties. We can see that this proportion of students, the proportion of students indicating having more often financial difficulties than usual range from 6% to 15% here, depending on the indicator. This means that the majority of students seems not to have been affected by the pandemic. But it is now worth looking at different student groups because they are not evenly affected by this pandemic and its restrictions. We'll now examine deeper the indicator insufficient income to cover expenditure. We see on this graph that the most vulnerable groups or at-risk groups regarding financial difficulties are the following. 26 to 35-year-old students here. Younger and older students indicate less often having financial difficulties due to the pandemic. Then we have students whose parents have lower education attainment. This bar. Students with migration background. The most at risk are the students born and educated abroad, say the international students. They are here with 23%. This can be linked, this result can be linked to an interesting finding from an analysis from the Observatoire de la vie étudiante. The analysis states that family support is the main resource against financial difficulties. And obviously in this context, international students couldn't benefit in an equivalent way from this source of support.
Yes, we all again lost your shared screen.
All right.
It's so intriguing data that it doesn't want to be relieved.
I'm really sorry. I ask for your patience. I ask also myself for patience.
No worries. I know it's the very first presentation with this data, and it's actually really today that it came public, so we should be happy.
Thanks. So I was saying that another student group which is at risk is those who work regularly in a job that is not related to their studies. It's here this bar here with 22%. We also looked at institutional characteristics like type of institutions or field of study in our report, and we noticed differences across study degree and type of institutions. But what was really striking is that students in the field of study art were heavily affected by the pandemic. So 1 in 2 students indicated having insufficient income to cover their expenditure due to the pandemic, and 1 in 5 reported restrictions on basic necessities. The visuals on the slide illustrate that art students and art sector as a whole suffered financially from the pandemic restrictions. We can assume that many of them lost their job as music teacher, as employee in art institutions and companies, or as dancer and so on. Another possible interpretation is the following. So this group of students is also vulnerable in routinized context. With the result of the last Swiss survey on social and economic condition from year 2020, we analyzed that compared to all other fields of study, our students report the highest proportion of financial difficulties, material deprivation, and student debt. Regarding the material and financial support received, results show very low proportion of students who received support due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So this emergency support could come from different sources, but we can see that the proportions are in general very low. Almost 5% from the family and or the partner, about 3% from the university, 1% from the state as grant or law, 1% from friends, neighbors, or fellow students, and almost 1% from non-profit organizations. So these numbers show that the proportion of students with financial difficulties due to pandemic are always higher than the proportion of students who received emergency support due to the COVID-19 situation. I will now move on to the mental health situation of students in the COVID-19 context. So this first graph shows the proportion of students with mental health problems. Again, we are mainly interested in these dark green bars, sub-bars, which shows these bars show the proportion of students who indicate having had mental health issues due to the pandemic in year 2020. Obviously, compared to the financial situation, we can see here that a very large number of students were mentally affected by the pandemic. The proportions range from 30% to 49%. We'll now look at the at-risk student groups as well. So this graph shows the indicator feeling down, depressed, or hopeless, broken by different characteristics. This is one item of the 4 we had. So the vulnerable students are mainly younger students here, female students. This result is consistent with usual health survey that established that women in general report more often than men a poor health status. We can also see that students with migration background are also more often impacted than domestic students. Again, international students are the most affected. Here in this last analysis, we can see correlation as statistical association between financial difficulties and mental health problems. 60% of students indicate feeling more often than normal down, depressed, or hopeless. Among these student groups is the student group with financial difficulties indicates more often feeling down, depressed, or hopeless due to the pandemic. This is also the case when we look at the art student. 1 in 2 students in arts indicated having financial difficulties, and 53% of this group reporting having felt down, depressed, or hopeless because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Another interesting result is regarding the effect of educational background on mental health. It is interesting to see that for 40% of students with higher education background report having felt down, depressed, or hopeless due to the pandemic. This proportion is only 1 percentage point higher than for the total. That is to say 39%. So we can see here that family resources couldn't here protect students from the impact of the pandemic on mental health. We also analyzed the regional variations of mental health problems. We assign a region to each student based on the localization of the higher education in which they were enrolled. On the map, on the right, you can see the 7 regions of Switzerland marked with different colors, which is an analytical classification. On the left, on the west side, there is the French-speaking part. So here, mainly. And the results show that 45% of students of the Lake Geneva region, so this region marked with light blue, 45% of students indicated having mental health problems, compared again to 39% for the total. It's interesting to show you this because this region was particularly impacted by the COVID-19 during the first wave in spring 2020, with more cases and hospitalizations compared to the other regions. I will now move on to the last result of this presentation, which deals with the psychological or counseling support received by students. So only 3% of students reports, almost 3% of students reports having received emergency psychological support due to the pandemic. 9% indicate that they received a psychological support not related to the pandemic, so a usual one. So we can see that compared to the very high proportions of students affected by the pandemic, this emergency support is very low. I am now done presenting the main results, and I will be happy to answer your questions if I can.
Thank you, Yasin. It was very interesting. And actually, we already had one question in the chat before. Paul was asking, did you find out that stress for young people aged from 18 to 29 in general is higher in comparison with other age groups, even when there is no pandemic?
I don't have information on this point. I didn't analyze this. We didn't analyze this. So I'm sorry, but I cannot answer the question, but I have marked it down, and I can write afterwards an email to this person with this information.
Yes, and I also saw now that Srinka raised hand. So please, Srinka, you can also ask yourself, turning your mic on.
You hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I have a few questions. One of them is, I have performed a study on pandemic in Austria. We have had 12,000 participants, and it was also a cross-sectional study. And one of the outcomes that we have been watching were also low incomes, be it between mental health and all others. So I would like to ask you, how come you didn't use the household net per capita income, for example? And that is the one question. And second one
can you repeat your question?
How come you didn't use the household net per capita income as a measure?
Yeah.
That's the one. And the second question is related to mental health. I mean, when you talk about mental health and you put depression and anxiety kind of together, I mean, you obviously have this patient health questionnaire you set for. But, for example, there is a tool like hospital anxiety scale, which has two different subscales. One is for anxiety and one is for depression. So maybe in the sense that would be, it would give you perspective in depression and in anxiety as well, like separate items, not to put them all together. Thank you.
Yeah, for the first question, I'm sorry, I don't have an answer neither. We did not analyze this. For the second answer, for the second question, did I understood well that you want to know the proportion of students having not only anxiety but anxiety and depression symptoms together?
Sorry, usually like for depression, we used only patient health questionnaire 9. So when index is higher than 8, then we actually say the person has moderate and severe depression. But I'm not, and then there is another tool that we use in mental health, and that is the hospital anxiety scale that has separate subscales for depression and anxiety. So I would just like to know, how come you have chosen to measure anxiety with patient health questionnaire? That's all.
Yeah. So we had very interesting results with the patient health questionnaire 9 in our last survey. I can show you a slide on this. Sorry for the other one because it's in German, but for you it will be convenient. You can see here proportion of students and population of the same age with major depression. This index is computed with the patient health questionnaire 9. And you can see that students report more often being affected with a major depression than the population of the same age. So that was an interesting tool for us. It's also an international proved tool, and that's why we decided to use the patient health questionnaire 4, and we added this item feeling lonely because the isolation feeling was also an important aspect of the pandemic COVID-19 pandemic context, and we wanted to measure both anxiety symptoms as well as depression symptoms. And this patient health questionnaire 4, it's the shortest version of all these screenings, because they're also the general anxiety disorder 7, GAD-7. It's another tool instrument, and after evaluating different instruments and options, we decided to use this one because it's quite short. We did not have so much space in the higher education graduate survey, and it's short, but it's also quite complete or comprehensive in the way that we have both anxiety and depression symptoms covered.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I did, you did. And I have one question. Did you maybe check the change from the first wave? I mean, if you would take the wave means of all this mental health problems that you, I mean, depression and anxiety, did you compare other waves with the first wave?
What do you mean by wave? Survey wave?
You had the lockdown wave, I mean, corona
Yeah.
wave. So that's what I mean, because it's possible also to obtain the mean if you use the mental health outcomes and compare the means between the waves. And then see, you know, not only we know that youth is actually the vulnerable group, but if you compare the means, then you could see, has it been increasing, decreasing, or any significant change?
If I understood well, I'm afraid we couldn't do this because the wording of the question is, have you been bothered at some point in year 2020 by the following problems? And so we have only one time reference point, so we cannot compare one-to-one these results to other results because the wording of the question is not exactly the same, but and we cannot compare within a year 2020 different different results because we only have one survey.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question? Did I answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, you did.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Srinka, for your questions. And I also saw that Paul raised hand. So please, Paul, feel free.
Thank you, Marlin. And thank you for the interesting presentation. I would like to say that I am in Austria and Vienna. And here I'm a psychologist. And so I'm especially interested in the results concerning mental health. I'm from psychological student counseling in Austria that is part of the Ministry of Science. And my question now is, I find it very impressive that so many persons did take part. You said 57,000, more than 57,000. How did you manage to get so many persons to take part in your study? That's the first question. And the second question, could you please repeat some information about the population who took part? As I understood, all who took part have either already a degree of bachelor or a degree of master, and only those who have already finished studies were part of the population. Is this right? I would like to ask you, Yasin, to repeat some information to this.
Right, thanks. So I'll show the slide on the key facts about this survey of higher education graduates. Regarding the net response rate here, so we are very lucky here at the FSO to have this response rates. It's not only this survey, but the Swiss survey on study and living condition of student lives, which is related to EUROSTUDENTs. We also have very high response rate for this survey, and this is related to a very good quality of address to contact the students. Higher education institution can deliver us the contact information of students. And another point is that we we send regular letter mail to the students. So it's quite now unusual to have a mail. And so it helps to make students participate to our surveys. And it's also related to the good reputation of these surveys. We have stakeholders included in our sounding board, including the National Student Union, and they are very much interested in our result, because these results can also help carry on actions. So these three aspects are quite relevant to understand this response rate, I would say. Then regarding your second questions, the population studied, it's a subpopulation of the survey, which is bachelor's and master's graduates. Person who gets their diploma from June 2020 to December 2020. And that's why I mentioned this, that there was a selection bias. We only have students who graduated. Did I answer your question, Paul?
Yes, thank you very much. It's interesting how you could have an influence on the participants, because it's really unusually high to have a response rate of 58%. Congratulations to that. And but the other point, I think it is a certain weakness of the study that there are only the graduate persons who took part in it. But nevertheless, it's very interesting.
Right, you're completely right. It's a weakness, and the consequences that I mentioned is that either financial difficulties or mental health problems could be underestimated.
Thank you, Yassine. Thank you, Paul. We also have one question in the chat from Lucas, and he was asking that of the students, which group or institution, for example, business, law, medicine, etc., had the least impact on mental health? Did you manage to look into that?
Yes, we did. I don't know the results by heart, so I have to look at the report. Just one sec.
And actually, it was a request before as well, that could you share the link of the presentation or the report in German so that people don't have to look for it?
Yes, of course.
And you can also send it later to me, because we can maybe link this to the EUROSTUDENT webpage as well, where we put up the recording as well.
So I think you're still seeing my screen, but
yes,
it's okay. I'm gonna show you the results about mental health, right? It's not about the financial difficulties regarding the indicators broken by field of study. That was the question.
Yeah, which group institution had the least impact on mental health?
Yeah. Okay, we're here at FSO, we have a specific classification for field of studies. We don't use always the ESCAD one. So you can see here field of studies of university students. And among university students, the more impacted were law students here, and the less were those in medical schools. And when it comes to University of Applied Sciences students, in German, Fachhochschule und Pädagogische Hochschule, you can see here that the students most impacted were the students in arts, as I mentioned, then in the field of study design, and the less impacted were the students in agriculture field of study, as well as the teacher learning education. This here.
Thank you, Yasin, for showing us this data as well. As I said, we will receive the link to the presentation and the report in German, and then we will share it on the EUROSTUDENT webpage. I think it's the easiest way because we can put the recording up there as well. I have one question myself too. Have you already managed to compare the Swiss data with any other countries? Have you had a look? Where are the differences, or?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm listening to you.
Yeah, you can continue.
All right. Yeah, as I mentioned, you heard the name of the Observatoire de la vie étudiante in France many times, because that was an inspiration for our study, and we also look at the reports published on this topic, and we could see that break variables were also correlated in a similar way. And I can show you a slide on this. Maybe it's a bit small, but you can here see the index emotional distress from the mental health inventory 5. So the one I presented for the general population. And so this is the proportion of students with emotional distress broken by different characteristics. So in France, as well as in Switzerland, the statistical correlation between financial difficulties and mental health are also established here. So it's in French, so I will explain it. Important ou très importante mean that financial difficulties are high or very high, and the proportion of emotional distress get higher as well. So regarding the age, we also see here that no, regarding the age, it's not the same. It's older students that were the most affected with emotional distress, and not the younger one. It's rather the opposite in Switzerland. Regarding the effect of gender, we see same effect than in Switzerland, or also in other international comparison. Female report more often to be mentally affected. And here also interesting to notice, foreign students are also the most more affected than domestic students. And I can say that maybe this international student group, we could say that they are quite vulnerable to context change, because a lack of social networks, because they are not in their own country and away from the families. That could be an interpretation.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I can also send this the link to the to this publication if it's not already on the EUROSTUDENT website.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Does anyone have any further questions or comments? So this is a moment now when you could still join in. Seems that not. But then anyways, thanks a lot, Yasin, for a very intriguing presentation. And I will receive the presentation, the links, and I think that all these materials will be uploaded to the EUROSTUDENT webpage by tomorrow, the latest. I really believe that.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
May I just ask something? Before leaving, I can now share the link in the chat if you want to.
Okay.
It would be helpful, definitely.
That's why that's what I was trying to do. So just oops, just 1 second. Yes, here.
And I am reminding you the EUROSTUDENT feedback form. If you didn't manage to do it earlier, then you can take this link from here as well. Anyways, last but not least, I can already say that in December, we will have next EUROSTUDENT Talks, and as we did last year, we are trying to involve student representatives from different countries and have a kind of looking back and ahead discussion, like what were the challenges of this year and the positive aspects and what they are expecting from the upcoming year. And very, very probably the date will be the 15th of December, so you can already save it. Further information will come through the EUROSTUDENT mailing list and in Twitter, as usual. Anyway, thanks a lot, Yasin. It was a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. And thanks to everyone else as well for coming and discussing with us. Okay, but bye-bye and have a nice day, and until the next time.
Thank you. Goodbye to you all.
Bye.
Bye.